Okay, my name is Rick Dore. I'm here at the National Roadster Show. It's 2014, and we just debuted the Black Pearl today here in Pomona.
Black Pearl is one of the most gorgeous custom cars I ever seen. Tell me, what's the origin?
Really, the history of this car, it went like this. The owner, James, bought a 48 Jag Salon, a 4-door. Wanted to customize it. We got the car back to the shop. After several months, we started getting the paint off, investigating the car more. There was a substantial amount of rust, but the rust could have been repaired. But overall, the car was very flimsy. The sheet metal, I don't know if it was because it was just after World War II and the metal was tight or whatever, but it was very flimsy. Structurally, it didn't feel right. So we sold the body completely, and we took the frame, modified the frame, and James and I had a car like this in our heads for years. We wanted to do a concept-looking car that was from the 30s, that was very Art Deco, but that was a fastback. So we managed to pull this off.
That's beautiful. So every single piece of sheet metal is made by hand from...
Yes, I did most of the styling along with James. Every step of the way, James knew. He was as hands-on as he could be with being busy. But he was there every step of the way. I did the styling, and we persuaded Marcel to do the sheet metal work. There's nobody more badass than Marcel Delay. He did an incredible job. We had to make a few changes. You know, Marcel is very into original French cars, in my opinion, and anybody who knows me and looks at the history of my cars, I've always been influenced by the French builders and Fagoni and Falaschi, Delage, all those guys. But to be able to do a car like this with Marcel brought the whole custom thing to another level. So.
And tell me about underneath all the beautiful sheet metal. What's the drivetrain? The
drivetrain's a high-performance 302, a Ford. It's got a C4 transmission. Like I said, it's a performance motor. It's air ride front and back. The chassis was modified in the front and the rear as well. And, you know, it's a badass car. It runs great. It's got a nice ride. It lays out. All of the brass you see on this, it's brass colored with the exception of the grille shell, the grille surround, the hubcaps, and the beauty ring. Those are the only things that were brass plated. Everything else is real brass, was polished, and then put a flattener in the clear and covered it. The pieces that were polished, again, were the center caps of the wheels, the beauty rings, and the grille shell. We brass plated them, and Sherm's Custom Chrome managed to get the color combination, well, not combination, but the color accurate to the rest of the brass.
It's beautiful. But I have to ask you, I mean, you're an artist. I mean, this is a piece of art. How do you feel about James driving the car around? Do you want it to be driven, or, you know?
Yeah, good question. I get that all the time. James drives his cars hard. I mean, if you live in Northern California and you get out on the freeways, at some point you're probably going to bump into James Hetfield. He might be flying by you doing 100, but you're going to see him at some point. I don't think this car will be any different. He drives all of them. There's a few that he drives less, but for the most part he drives all of them. So what we try to do is, this is I think our 8th car James and I have built together. I try to do all of the shows, get the car around before we give it to James. So this way we don't have to go back and...
I have to ask you, I saw his Lincoln in Sacramento a couple of years ago. Did you feel that one as well? Because it reminisces this one, well, you know, the French Art Deco era.
Yeah.
Tell me, how did you get into that line? I mean, building hard routes and customs inspired by the 20s cars from France.
Right.
30s cars.
You know, my heroes were never the guys that were contemporary in the 50s, without mentioning any names. You know, the big Hollywood car builders. I mean, I love all those guys, and the cars they built were incredible, but my heroes have always been the Europeans, the Fagoni and Falaschis and so on. For me, that's just my own opinion. So during the 90s, when I was doing cars, I got as close as I could with the styling, taking a 36 Ford Roadster and you know, doing the Duesenberg side trim and the Zephyr rear quarter fenders and the chrome accents as close as I could that the car would allow me to get to. Then you fast forward several years, things change. You know, met James, we became pretty good friends, still are, and we were hanging around a year or two before we ever talked about building a car. And James has allowed me to go the next step with custom cars. Most people don't have the means to build a car like this, or the Zephyr. They're big dollar cars, they're 4 or 5 year projects that we managed to complete in 8 or 10 months. I think the most was like 2 years. That's because there are other projects going on as well. So I did the best I could in the 80s and 90s with the cars I was building, but these days we've gone the next step.
Yeah. Well, you already told me that you do projects that would take 4 or 5 years and 8 to 10 months. How long did this car take to finish?
James got this car 2 years ago, and it sat for 3 months, and then we started getting into it. And finally we had a conversation where I says, man, you know, it's a 4-door. I know we were thinking along the same lines, but this car is going to be impossible to get away from that flat top Jag Salon look. You know, so what are our options? And we talked about concept cars and fastbacks, and I talked with Marcel. He was on the same page as us, so we put our heads together. And I had a rendering done by Jimmy Smith, which really wasn't close, but it was a starting point. The rest we winged it.